What is going on, guys? Welcome to this Python tutorial series for intermediates. In today's episode, we're going to talk about XML processing. Now, up until now, we've always stored our data into simple files or into professional databases. But sometimes we need a structured way to save files, but we don't want to build a big professional database. We don't want to use a database. We want to use files, but we want to keep our data into a structured way locally on our computer. And for this, we can use XML. Now, XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, and it's very scalable because you can do a lot of things with it. For example, you can build professional graphical user interfaces just with XML, and a lot of frameworks do this actually. So, XML is a great way to hierarchically structure our data, and it's also platform independent and application independent. For example, if I build a program in Python that saves stuff into an XML file or outputs data into an XML file, I can also have a C++ application that reads in that data and that processes that data. So it's not limited to one programming language, not limited to one application, not limited to one operating system. It's platform and application independent. So let us get into the code and see how to work with XML in Python. Now in Python, we have two different ways to work with XML data. We can either use the sax module or we can use the DOM module. So either the simple API for XML, which would be sax, or the document object model, which would be DOM. I'm going to show you both modules and libraries here. But first of all, let us talk about the XML file itself. So if you're not familiar with XML, this is how an XML file looks. So we have different tags here. So every tag has to be closed in the end. If you have name, you open name like that, and then you close it like that. So in between is the value of name. So we start with one main tag here, the group, and in every group or in that group, we have many persons. So we have the group tag, which starts in the beginning and ends at the end, or is closed at the end. And in that group, we have multiple persons. And every person, again, has the attribute ID. So this here is an attribute. These are nodes or tags or elements. And they also have their text values here. So these are the values of the individual nodes or tags. And this is the person object. So we have a hierarchy here. And we're going to use this structured data here in our Python script. And we're going to start with the sax module, so with the simple API for XML. Now, this API, you mainly use it when you have very limited memory, because the difference to DOM is that it never loads the full XML file into the RAM. So it's either useful when you have very, very, very large XML files, or when you have very limited memory. Now, another thing is that with this module here, with this sax module, you cannot really manipulate anything. You cannot really change values in the XML file. You can only read them. You can only maybe process them in the script, but you cannot change them. So if you want to change it, you have to use the DOM module. But I'm going to show you how that works in a second. So let's start with that. The first thing that we need to do is to import xml.sax. So this is the module that we're mainly going to use here. And to now work with a file, what we need to do is we need a content handler. We need a handler that handles the XML file, and then we need a so-called parser. So we need two things. We need a handler that works with the file and a parser that translates the file. So the parser is taking these XML tags that we saw and converting them into our Python script. So the first thing would be to define a handler in some way, and then we have a parser, which to this parser we add the handler. So we say this handler belongs to this parser. What we could do, of course, is we could just say handler equals xml.sax.content handler. So this would be one way of creating a handler, but we want to customize our handler. So we want to make our handler different. Therefore, we're not going to use that. We're not going to do it like that. We're going to create our own class that inherits from content handler so that we can override the method. You should know how that works if you saw the inheritance video. So let's just go and say class. I'm going to call it group handler because we have a group of persons. And this group handler inherits from the xml.sax.content handler. And then we have three methods that we're going to use. We have the method start element, and these methods have these names, so we need to use that, these names so that we overwrite them. And the first function or the first method is start element. The first method is start element, which means that this function is the function we use or which gets called when our handler processes an element. So when we get into an element, this is the first function that gets called. And it has the parameters self, name, and attributes, like that. Now, when we get into an element, what do we want to do? First of all, what I want to do is I want to create an attribute in my class self.current to know which element or what kind of node I'm currently working with. So I'm going to say self.current equals name, because the name, let's just try before I do anything else. Let's just print what name is so that you know how it works. So this is basically my class right now, and I'm just going to create an instance of that. Handler equals group handler. And now what I have to do when I have a handler is I have to create a parser. So I'm going to say parser equals xml.sax.parser. Make parser. So here we're not using a constructor, we're using a method. And this parser, I now have to set a content handler to it. So I'm saying parser.set content handler, and I'm adding my handler that I just created here. And then I say parser.parse and pass the file. So in this case, data.xml. By the way, if I don't forget about it, you'll hopefully find a link in the description where you can download this XML file. I think I'll think about that. So this is how this works. And when I now run this, you'll see that printing the name is just printing the node or printing the element or the tag name, basically. So what it does is when I say parse, where is my file? When I say parse, what it does is it starts getting into all the elements. So this parse method gets into the XML file and processes all the text. And what I do here is whenever I get into an element, start element, I just print the name. And the name is group, person, name, age, weight, height, person, and so on. So here we have all the names. Now, of course, this is not what we're going to do. We're going to process the things here. We're going to process these elements. So what I want to know is what is the current name of the element, or what is the name of the current element. So I'm going to say self.current equals name, so that I know, am I processing a person, am I processing a name or an age, or what am I processing? So if this thing that I'm dealing with right now, so if my current name here is person, so if I am in a person element, I'm just going to say print person, so that we know a new person starts. And then I'm going to print the ID of that person. So I'm going to say ID is placeholder. And now to get the ID, I just need to access the attributes. The attributes are a kind of dictionary. So I'm just going to say, give me the ID of the attributes. So I'm going to access the attributes and ask for the key ID. This should work. So when I run this right now, hopefully, yeah, as you can see, it always starts a new person and prints the ID first. Now, I also want to print all the other values. I want to get the name, I want to get the age, the height, and the weight. So to do that, I have to process the individual tags and the individual or the data, the content of the individual tags. And to do that, I'm going to use or to override the characters method. So I'm going to say characters, and this method right here accepts two parameters again, like self and content. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, okay, if this current element, because when I start in an element, I set the current name. And then once I did that, I'm going to process the information. And if I'm working with, if the current element here is the name, sorry, I need to use a different operator. If this is the name, I'm just going to say print or actually I'm going to say self.name equals content. Because what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, if I'm right now dealing with a tag that is a name, what I want to do is I want to create a new attribute in my class that is name, and then I want to set it to the content of the element that I'm in right now. So to not confuse you, let me show you what I mean. When I am here right now, when I reach this point here, the current element that I'm working with is name. And what I want to do is I want to create an attribute in my class, in this class here, with the name, and the content is Mike Smith in this case, or Anna Smith, or Bob Johnson. Doesn't matter. I get these values into my attribute. So this is what I do. And then I say, okay, if it's not name, but H, so elif self dot current equals H, then I do the same thing for H, say self.h equals content. And then I say, okay, if or elif self.weight equal, self.current equals weight. I'm going to say self.weight equals content. And last but not least, if self.current equals height, I'm going to say self.height equals content. And now last but not least, now I have these attributes. The last thing that I want to do is when I end an element, when I get to the end of an element, I want to print that data. So I'm going to say def end element. And here we just have the self and the name. When I get to the end of an element, what I want to do is if self.current equals name, I'm just going to print self, or actually let's do this in a bit more beautiful way. So name equals, or name is dot format self dot name. And then I say elif self dot current equals h print h dot format self dot h. Now I'm going to copy the rest here. I'm going to copy this branch here and add it 2 more times. Now, if it's weight, I'm going to say weight self dot weight. And last but not least, again, height. Then I get the height self dot height. So this should hopefully work. Yeah, almost. Oh, of course, at the end of the end element, I always need to set the current to empty so that it does not start with height again when it gets to the next element immediately. So now it works. As you can see, I read all the elements from the XML file. I have person 1, I have person 2, person 3, 4, 5, and all the values here. Of course, what I can do is I can save these values into an object, so I can create a class person and then assign or use all these methods here, this handler here, basically to return that to my person. Or I could just add an element def get person and then return a new person object with all these attributes if I want to convert them or basically read them from the XML file into my script. We can do that the same way we did it with the database. So if you want to do that, experiment around with it, but I'm not going to do that right now. So let's look at the second way to do that with DOM. So now let us do the same thing with the DOM module. So the first thing that we need to do is to import xml.dom.minidom. And this is basically a minimal implementation of the DOM module since we're not going to use all the functionalities. This is totally enough. And DOM works a little bit differently. So in DOM, we work with so-called DOM trees, which build a hierarchical structure. They view the XML file as a so-called tree, as a, basically a tree. And every element, every tag is just a branch in that tree. So to create a DOM tree object, we just need to parse the XML file with the DOM module. So we're going to create a DOM tree equals xml.dom.minidom. data.parse, and again data.xml. So this right now is our DOM tree. When we do that, we parse the whole XML file into our script, and we have that tree loaded in our RAM. Now, the next thing that we need to do, of course, is we need to find the main object, the so-called document element. When we look into our file again, we have this main tag here, this group tag, that is the document element. So if I want to get this, I just write group equals DOM-tree.document element. So it's basically the root of the tree, the root of the DOM tree. And to now get all the persons, to get the collection of all the persons in that group, what I do is I say persons equals group dot get elements by tag name, quite a long function name, and then I pass, of course, person. So I pass the tag, and what I get here is the collection of all the elements with the tag name person that are contained in group, and I save them into a persons object. So what we're doing now is we're trying to print the same thing that we printed with the sax module. So to do that, we're going to say for person, for every person in these persons, in that person collection here, we're going to do the following thing. We're going to print, first of all, print person, and then we're going to print the ID. So we're going to check if person dot has attribute, because we don't have to specify an ID. Maybe we don't specify an ID, so we cannot read it. If person has the attribute ID, if this is the case, we're going to say print ID, or ID is placeholder dot format, and then I say person dot get attribute ID. So this should actually already work. Yeah, as you can see, we have the same result as with the sax tree, and now we're going to do this for every element. Now this will be a little bit, I don't want to say complicated, but it will be a long statement. So what we're going to do now is we're going to print all the values of the individual subnodes, so of name, age, weight, and height. But we're going to do this in the DOM way. So we're going to say print, and now we're going to say name is placeholder dot format, and here we now have to make again a query. So I'm going to say that person, give me the get elements by tag name, and now I want to get all the elements that have the tag name name. Of course, there's only one because every person only has one name. So let's look in the file again. We're now at one person element. I don't care which one, let's say 3 here. And now I get a list of all the tags that have the element, the tag name, sorry, name. This is exactly one, but it's still in a collection. So even though it's just one, I get a list. So I have to pick the first object, the index 0. Now, of course, this is just the element. I want to get the value of the element. So I get into the child nodes. So I say, I get the element with the name, or all the elements with the tag name name. Then I pick the first one, and then I want to get the child nodes. This would be the text, basically. Now, child nodes, again, is a collection, so I have to say index 0 again. And then finally, I want the data of that node. So I want to have not the object, but the data. And this is how I get the value. I get to the person element, then I get all the elements with the tag name name, get the first one, then get all the child nodes, get the first one, and then get the data of that. And I'm going to do this with age, weight, and height as well. So I'm going to say age, weight, and height. And here also age, weight, and height. And when I run this right now, you see that it works in the exact same way as the sax module. So now that I mentioned that we can also manipulate our XML file with DOM, let's do that. First of all, we need to manipulate that XML file in our program, in our script, in our RAM, And then when we're done, we have to export this into the file. So the first thing that we need to do is we just change something in our code here. For example, I will just take persons 2. So I'm going to say to take the third person, since we start counting from 0, and I'm going to change the name of that person. To do that, I'm just going to say get elements by tag name. So I'm getting the second or the third person, the person with the index 2, and accessing all the names. Again, I pick the first one, then I say again child nodes 0, and now I'm going to use the node value here. This is an attribute, node value, and I'm going to change that node value to something else. So let's call it new name. This is basically what I'm doing. Also, I can go ahead, take another person here, persons 0, and just say set attribute, for example, and then I set the ID to, I don't know, 100. Notice that we need to pass a string here because although it's 100, we don't want to pass an integer, we have to pass a string here. Now, these are the changes that I want to make. I want to change the name. Maybe let's go ahead and do the same thing for another person with the weight. So let's get to person, I don't know, 3, actually 4, and change the age to -10. Doesn't make sense, but it works. So let's do that. And to now do that, or to now apply that to the actual file, because now I have changed it in my DOM tree in my Python code, but this is not actually a change in the XML file. I just changed it for myself right now in the RAM. To now do that, I have to say DOM tree.write XML. And here I have to pass a file stream, and I'm just going to open up one here. So I'm going to say open data.xml. Of course, you can also feel free to save it in a new file, for example, data2.xml. Doesn't matter actually. And this is basically it. When we run this right now, you will see when I open this up that I have the ID 100 here. I have the new name here, and I have the age -10 here. And also you can see that it added a tag with the XML version. So we successfully manipulated that file with DOM, and this is how this basically works. Now, last but not least, let us talk about how to create new elements and add new elements to the XML file. What we first need to do is to define what these elements are, or how these elements look individually, and then put them all together and into the file. So the first thing that I do is I define a new person, and I use the DOM tree to create a new element. This, of course, does not mean that this element is directly the document element just because I created from the DOM tree, but it's just the DOM tree function create element. So I say DOM tree.create element name, person, because this is a person object. And then what I do is I say new person dot set attribute to set the ID to 6, because I think the highest ID that we have, except for the 100, was 5. So the next one would be 6, of course, as a string. And this is basically the element person. Of course, this person has sub-elements, name, age, weight, and height, but we need to create these first. So what I do next is I say, okay, name equals DOM tree.create element. So I create it independently from the person. I just create the element name. So I say create element name. And then I say name.append child. So I add something to that name, which is a text node. So I'm going to say DOM tree.create text node. And this text node will be the name. So in this case, we could say, I don't know, Paul Green or something like that, just one name. And this is basically our name element. So this is independent from the person yet, or still. So then we say age equals, or let's just copy that. We do the same thing for age, weight, and height again. So I say age equals create new element age. And then to age, I append the child or the text node, in this case 19, I don't know. then weight, and weight. And let's say he weighs, I don't know, 80 kilograms, and height, and height is 179 centimeters. So now we have all these independent elements, and now we have to add them to the new person. So we say new person dot append child name. So we add these elements, these independent elements, as a child to our new person. So name, age, weight, and height. And then what we of course need to do is we need to add the person to the group object, so to the document element. So I say group dot append child new person. And finally, I have to say DOM tree dot write XML. Open a new file stream again, data dot XML. And in writing mode, of course. And that's it. So when I run this, we get the information. And when we open our file right now, at the end, you'll see that here I have a new person. Of course, it's not structured, not indented. We could do that manually if you want. But the data is here. So I have the name, I have the age, I have the weight and the height. I also have the ID, and it's all in here. Of course, not formatted, but maybe there's also a way to do that in Python. But this is basically how you add new elements, new objects into the XML file. So that's basically what you need to know about XML processing in Python. This was quite a long video. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. And if so, hit the like button, please. Feel free to ask any questions or post any comments down below in the comment section. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see more. And thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.